In the rainy city of Portland, where commuters rush with heads down and hearts closed, Michael Thornton's world was defined by routine and solitude. Day after day, the same route, the same gray skies, the same feeling of monotony. Until one morning, his trusty pickup truck broke down. This middle-aged accountant found himself reluctantly joining the ranks of bus commuters on Route 14. That's when he noticed an unusual passenger at the back of the bus. A wild bobcat, sitting calmly among the passengers as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But as Michael began to unravel the truth behind this remarkable creature, he discovered something far more profound than just a wild animal that had learned to navigate public transit. How could a wild predator navigate public transport with the same route day after day, never missing a stop and never getting lost? And where did its journey truly lead? This is the story of a man, a wild cat, and a routine journey that became anything but ordinary. A mystery unfolding on the back seat of a city bus. Sometimes the most powerful changes in our lives come not from where we're going, but from who we meet along the way. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The world outside Michael Thornton's apartment window was a sheet of gray. Rain pounded against the glass, and he sighed as he drained the last of his coffee. 43 years old, with salt and pepper hair and perpetually tired eyes, Michael had never considered himself a bus person. His trusty Ford pickup had been his companion through 15 years of commuting to the accounting firm where he worked in downtown Portland, Oregon. But yesterday, the Ford had finally given up. A transmission problem, according to the mechanic at Pete's auto shop. 2 weeks minimum, Pete had said apologetically, wiping grease-stained hands on an equally dirty rag. Parts are back-ordered all the way from Detroit. So here Michael was, checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes, dreading the unfamiliar commute ahead. Route 14, every 30 minutes, with a transfer downtown. His colleague Alice had explained it all to him with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never owned a car, drawing little diagrams on a post-it note that now sat crumpled in his pocket. The rain was unrelenting as Michael rushed to the bus stop, his leather shoes already soaked through, his umbrella straining against the wind. The bus, 10 minutes late, finally wheezed to a stop. Michael climbed aboard, fumbling with unfamiliar bills as he paid his fare, feeling the eyes of regular commuters sizing him up as a newcomer. He found a seat halfway down the aisle and took out his phone, determined to lose himself in emails rather than acknowledge this temporary humiliation. His first day on public transit passed in a blur of inconvenience. Missed connections, crowded aisles, and the persistent smell of wet clothes and too many bodies in too small a space. Tomorrow, he promised himself as he finally unlocked his apartment door that evening. I'll call a rental car company. But the rental agencies were booked solid. A convention in town, a helpful but unsympathetic agent explained. And so, the next morning, Michael found himself trudging back to the same bus stop, his mood as dark as the overcast sky. The bus arrived, late again, and Michael boarded with resignation. He had just settled into a seat when something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was someone's unusual bag or perhaps an oversized stuffed animal. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light at the back of the bus, he realized he was looking at a bobcat. An actual bobcat. Tawny fur with dark spots, distinctive pointed ears with black tufts, and a short, bobbed tail. It sat quietly in the far corner of the bus, partially hidden behind the last row of seats. Michael blinked hard, certain he was hallucinating. He looked around at the other passengers, about a dozen people, most with headphones on or faces buried in their phones. No one seemed concerned about the wild predator in their midst. "Excuse me," Michael whispered to an elderly woman seated across from him. "Do you see that? At the back?" The woman, perhaps in her 70s with carefully coiffed silver hair, glanced up from her crossword puzzle. "Oh, that's just Rusty," she said matter-of-factly, then returned to her puzzle. "Just Rusty?" Michael stared at her, then back at the bobcat. Now that he looked more carefully, he noticed the animal wore some kind of collar, a thick band around its neck with what appeared to be a small box attached. A tracking device? For the remainder of his ride, Michael couldn't take his eyes off the creature. The bobcat remained still, occasionally scanning the bus with alert yellow eyes, but otherwise seeming perfectly at ease. When the bus approached the stop before Michael's office, the bobcat stood, stretched in a decidedly feline manner, and padded to the rear exit door. When the bus stopped, the animal slipped out before anyone could react. Michael watched through the window as the bobcat trotted purposefully down a side street and disappeared from view. "Did that really just happen?" he asked aloud, not particularly addressing anyone. A young man with a beard and flannel shirt looked up. "First time seeing Rusty, huh? Yeah, he rides this route pretty regular." "But it's a wild animal," Michael protested. The young man shrugged. "Seems pretty tame to me. Been seeing him for at least a year now. Nobody really knows the deal, but he never bothers anybody." Throughout his workday, Michael found himself distracted by thoughts of the bobcat. He searched online during his lunch break, finding nothing about bobcats on public transportation in Portland. He considered calling animal control but hesitated. The creature hadn't seemed aggressive, and apparently it was a regular presence that hadn't caused problems. By the end of the day, Michael had nearly convinced himself he'd imagined the whole thing. A stress-induced hallucination brought on by the disruption to his routine. But the next morning, there it was again. The bobcat, Rusty as the other passengers called it, boarded at the stop after Michael's, settling into the same back corner. Again, it departed 2 stops before Michael's destination. Fascination replaced fear. Michael began taking notes on his phone. The bobcat always boarded at Northeast Fremont Street at 7:42 a.m., always exited at Northeast Broadway and 19th Avenue at 7:58 a.m. In the evenings, Rusty boarded downtown at 5:37 p.m. and exited back at Fremont at 6:03 p.m. Michael's temporary transportation inconvenience became something else entirely, an investigation. On the 4th day, he adjusted his schedule, getting off at the same stop as Rusty in the morning. From a safe distance, he followed the bobcat as it trotted through an alley, across a small park, and eventually to the edge of Forest Park, Portland's massive urban wilderness area. The rental car agencies were now available. Pete's auto shop called to say they could get the parts sooner than expected. Michael ignored both. For the first time in years, he felt the thrill of genuine curiosity, of mystery. A week into his bus riding adventure, Michael stopped at a butcher shop near his apartment. "Do you have any scraps?" he asked. "Trimmings, bones, anything you'd normally discard?" The butcher, a burly man with impressive forearms, raised an eyebrow. "Got a dog?" "Something like that," Michael replied. The next morning, armed with a small paper bag of beef trimmings, Michael found a seat closer to Rusty's corner. The bus was more crowded than usual, forcing some standees to move toward the back. The bobcat tensed visibly, pressing itself further into its corner. "Give him space," Michael found himself saying to a teenager who stepped too close. The boy, noticing the bobcat for the first time, jumped back with a startled yelp. When the crowd thinned after a few stops, Michael carefully tossed a small piece of meat toward Rusty. The bobcat regarded it warily, then sniffed the offering. With deliberate movements, it consumed the meat, its eyes never leaving Michael. This became their ritual over the following days. Small offerings, cautious acceptance, growing recognition. Michael noticed more details. The GPS collar, yes, but also a small tag attached to it. A healed scar visible on Rusty's left flank when the fur shifted just so. The bobcat's immaculate grooming habits, the way it would carefully clean its paws after accepting Michael's offerings. 2 weeks turned into 3, and Michael's car remained at Pete's, all but forgotten. He had purposely not scheduled its retrieval, now addicted to his daily encounters with Rusty. He'd even started a journal dedicated to his observations. One evening, as they neared Rusty's stop, Michael noticed the bobcat seemed restless, pacing slightly in its corner. When the doors opened, instead of immediately exiting, Rusty hesitated, looking directly at Michael. Then, deliberately, the bobcat walked toward him, dropped something at his feet, and bounded off the bus. Michael looked down to find a small, smooth stone, the kind one might find in a stream bed. He picked it up, turning it over in his palm. Had the bobcat been carrying this? As what? A gift? The notion seemed absurd, yet the deliberate nature of the act left Michael wondering. That night, unable to contain his questions any longer, Michael called the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. After being transferred several times, he finally reached someone willing to listen. A bobcat riding the bus? The voice on the other end, belonging to a doctor. Eleanor Rivera, according to her introduction, was understandably skeptical. "Are you certain it wasn't a large domestic cat or perhaps someone's exotic pet?" "Absolutely certain," Michael replied firmly. "It's a bobcat, with a GPS collar and some kind of tag. It rides the same route every day." There was a pause, then. "What color is the collar?" "Green, with a black box about 2 inches square." Dr. Rivera's tone changed entirely. "Can you meet me tomorrow?" "I think I know your bobcat." The next morning, instead of going to work, Michael met Dr. Rivera at a small cafe near the Northeast Broadway stop where Rusty usually exited. She was a compact woman in her 50s with curly gray hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Tell me everything," she said after brief introductions, pulling out a notebook. Michael shared his observations, the consistent schedule, the calm demeanor, the acceptance of food, even the stone offering. Dr. Rivera listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. "His name isn't actually Rusty," she said finally. "We designated him WC117, but I like Rusty better." She smiled. He was part of a wildlife study focusing on urban-adjacent populations. We captured and collared 12 bobcats 3 years ago, tracking their movements around the city's periphery. "But why would a wild bobcat ride a bus?" Michael asked, still struggling with the fundamental strangeness of it. Dr. Rivera's expression grew more serious. "About 2 years ago, WC117-Rusty was hit by a car. Not severely, but he sustained injuries to his left hip and hind leg. A good Samaritan brought him to our wildlife rehabilitation center. We treated him, but during his recovery, something unusual happened." She sipped her coffee before continuing. "One of our wildlife rehabilitators, Maria Contreras, had been pioneering some controversial techniques for helping injured predators adapt to urban environments rather than trying to relocate them to increasingly shrinking wild habitats. She believed certain animals could learn to navigate human spaces safely if given the right introduction." "So she taught a bobcat to ride the bus?" Michael asked incredulously. Not exactly, but during his rehabilitation, Rusty was exposed to various urban stimuli, traffic sounds, human voices, even the interior of vehicles. Maria would take him on supervised field trips in a special carrier, gradually accustoming him to the city environment. The goal was to reduce stress and flight response in situations where he might encounter humans. Dr. Rivera pulled out her phone and showed Michael photos of Rusty during rehabilitation. His injured leg wrapped, being hand-fed by a woman with long dark hair and a gentle smile. After 4 months, we released him near Forest Park, expecting him to stick to the wilderness area while occasionally venturing into the urban periphery. The GPS data was fascinating. He established a territory that included both deep forest areas and the edges of the Beaumont-Wilshire neighborhood. "Where I catch the bus," Michael noted. Exactly. But then something strange happened. The GPS showed Rusty moving through the city in straight lines, at consistent speeds, not typical predator movement patterns. It took us weeks to realize he was riding public transportation. Michael laughed in disbelief. But why? What does he get out of it? Dr. Rivera shrugged. We can only theorize. The bus is warm, offers elevation for observation, and provides efficient movement across his territory without expending energy. Bobcats are naturally curious and adaptable. This one simply found an unconventional adaptation. Isn't it dangerous? For him or for passengers? Potentially, yes. That's why I'd like your help monitoring him. The collar transmits his location, but direct observations are invaluable. Would you be willing to continue documenting his behavior? It could be important research. And so began Michael's official role as a citizen scientist. Dr. Rivera provided him with a proper field journal and training on what behaviors to document. Each evening, Michael would email his observations to the research team. Through Dr. Rivera, Michael learned more about Rusty's routine. The Bobcat spent his days hunting in the less traveled areas of Forest Park, maintaining a territory of about 2 square miles. He avoided dogs and large groups of humans, but had become remarkably tolerant of the bus environment, perhaps associating it with the positive experiences during his rehabilitation. As weeks turned into months, Michael's interest deepened. He attended wildlife seminars, volunteered at weekend tracking workshops, and even visited the rehabilitation center where Maria Contreras worked. Maria remembered Rusty fondly. He was special from the beginning, she told Michael as they walked between enclosures housing injured owls, hawks, and a young cougar. Most bobcats hiss and spit during rehabilitation. He watched everything with such intelligence. Do you think he remembers you? Michael asked. Maria smiled sadly. I doubt it. Wild animals don't form attachments the way we do. But I like to think he associates humans with safety because of his time here. By now, Michael had retrieved his repaired truck, but found himself taking the bus by choice most days. His accounting colleagues had noticed the change in him. He spoke more animatedly, shared stories of his wildlife observations, even organized a fundraiser for the rehabilitation center. Then came the morning Michael boarded the bus and Rusty wasn't there, nor the next day or the day after. Concerned, he called Dr. Rivera. His collar stopped transmitting 3 days ago, she confirmed, worry evident in her voice. We're organizing search teams in Forest Park. For a week, Michael joined weekend search parties combing through the densely wooded ravines of Portland's urban forest. No sign of Rusty emerged. Michael found himself deeply affected by the Bobcat's absence, realizing how much meaning the mysterious creature had brought to his formerly monotonous life. Then came a call from Dr. Rivera on a rainy Tuesday evening. We found him, she said, her voice tight. He's alive but injured. Someone shot him, probably mistook him for a coyote or simply didn't care. A hiker found him near the Wildwood Trail. Michael rushed to the wildlife center. Rusty lay sedated in a large enclosure, his beautiful fur shaved in patches where veterinarians had treated wounds on his shoulder and side. "Will he recover?" Michael asked, his throat constricting at the sight of the vulnerable creature. "Physically, yes," Maria answered, joining them. "But his trust in humans may be permanently damaged. He may need to be relocated to a more remote habitat." The thought of never seeing Rusty on the bus again filled Michael with unexpected grief. Over the next weeks, he visited the rehabilitation center regularly, sitting quietly near Rusty's enclosure, occasionally reading aloud from magazines or books, wanting the Bobcat to maintain some association of human voices with safety. As Rusty healed, Michael approached Maria and Dr. Rivera with a proposal, one that had been forming in his mind since the Bobcat's disappearance. "The land adjacent to mine backs up to Forest Park," he explained. "It's for sale, 5 acres, mostly wooded. What if I purchased it as a protected corridor? A safe place for Rusty to live with minimal human contact, but close enough to monitor?" The scientists were surprised by his commitment but supportive of the concept. With their guidance, Michael navigated the complex process of establishing a private wildlife easement. He used most of his savings as down payment on the land, working with a local conservation trust to ensure it would remain undeveloped in perpetuity. 3 months after his injury, Rusty was deemed ready for release. On a crisp autumn morning, Michael, Dr. Rivera, and Maria transported the Bobcat to the edge of Michael's newly acquired property. When the carrier door opened, Rusty paused, surveying his surroundings cautiously. He wore a new, more advanced GPS collar, funded in part by public donations that had poured in after a local newspaper ran a story about Portland's bus-riding Bobcat. For a moment, it seemed Rusty might bolt into the underbrush. Instead, he turned and looked directly at the 3 humans. His gaze lingered longest on Michael before he calmly padded away into the dappled forest shadows. In the months that followed, Rusty's GPS data showed him establishing a new territory that included Michael's protected corridor. Trail cameras captured images of him looking healthy and alert. Occasionally, Michael would glimpse him at dawn or dusk, a fleeting shadow moving through the trees at the edge of his property. But the most remarkable development came 6 months after Rusty's release. Michael was waiting at his usual bus stop one morning when he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Turning slowly, he saw Rusty sitting at the edge of the wooded area across the street, observing him with those same intelligent yellow eyes. When the bus arrived, Michael boarded as usual. Through the window, he saw the Bobcat cross the street and, to his astonishment, hop onto the bus through the rear door when a group of students exited. Rusty made his way to his old corner seat as if he'd never been away. The other regular passengers noticed, and a murmur of excitement spread through the bus. "Rusty's back," someone whispered. The driver, catching sight of the Bobcat in his rearview mirror, simply shook his head with a smile. 2 stops later, Rusty exited at his usual stop, disappearing once again into the urban landscape. The pattern continued, not daily as before, but once or twice a week, Rusty would appear at the bus stop and ride his old route. Dr. Rivera theorized that the Bobcat now primarily hunted in the protected forest corridor, but occasionally made social visits to his former urban territory. The story of Portland's bus-riding Bobcat eventually reached national news. A children's book author created an illustrated story, Rusty Rides the Bus, with proceeds benefiting wildlife rehabilitation. Local businesses began displaying Rusty Friendly Zone stickers, indicating their support for urban wildlife coexistence. At Dr. Rivera's suggestion, Michael started leading monthly urban wildlife awareness walks, educating Portland residents about the bobcats, coyotes, deer, and other wildlife living alongside them. What had begun as a reluctant bus commute had transformed into a passionate second calling. On crisp mornings when the mist hung low over Forest Park, Michael would sometimes sit on his back porch with a cup of coffee, surveying the protected land that now served as Rusty's home. Occasionally, he would glimpse a familiar tawny form moving through the trees, pausing perhaps to acknowledge the human who had become an unexpected ally. In those moments, Michael reflected on how an inconvenience, a broken-down truck, had led him to discover a hidden world existing alongside his own, a parallel life full of wonder and connection he might never have known. And in the quiet dawn, man and bobcat, separated by species and experience but united by mutual respect, could share, however briefly, the same small corner of a complex world. In saving Rusty, Michael had found something he hadn't realized was missing: purpose beyond the confines of his accounting ledgers, connection to something wild and true. And Portland had gained something too: a living reminder that even in the heart of the city, wonder waited for those willing to look up from their phones and truly see the extraordinary in the ordinary. And sometimes, if you were lucky, that wonder might sit quietly in the back of the number 14 bus, yellow eyes watching the human world roll by, never getting lost.